The 1960s were a cinematic goldmine, but let's be honest, most people only remember the polished blockbusters and glossy musicals. Beneath that shiny Hollywood surface, stranger and edgier films were simmering, waiting to explode. Some flopped, some confused critics, and others vanished for years before clawing their way back as cult treasures. How many of these hidden gems have slipped past you? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dig into the forgotten side of the 60s. The Innocents, 1961. Imagine stepping into a massive estate filled with children, secrets, and ghostly whispers. That's The Innocents, a chilling Gothic thriller that takes Henry James's classic story, The Turn of the Screw, and transforms it into a psychological nightmare. Deborah Kerr plays a governess hired to care for two young children in a remote mansion, but something is disturbingly off. Are the kids possessed? Are ghosts manipulating them? Or is it all in her head? Director Jack Clayton leans into ambiguity, using eerie black-and-white cinematography that plays tricks on your eyes. Shadows stretch across the screen, mirrors reflect unsettling images, and every creak of the floorboards feels loaded with menace. The movie never hands you answers. It just leaves you spiraling in doubt, exactly like the heroine herself. That's what makes it so haunting. You start questioning what's real and what's imagined. When it was first released, The Innocents didn't make a huge splash. Audiences were still hooked on big Technicolor epics and bright comedies, not this kind of moody horror. But over time, it developed a cult reputation among fans of atmospheric fright. You won't find jump scares here, but you will find icy dread that lingers long after the credits. Deborah Kerr's performance is a masterclass in unraveling sanity. So why does this one matter? Because it's proof that terror doesn't need monsters jumping out of the dark. It just needs doubt, shadows, and the feeling that something's deeply wrong in the corner of your eye. That's The Innocents. Quiet, cold, and unforgettable. Carnival of Souls, 1962. What happens when a filmmaker known for industrial training reels decides to make a horror movie? You get Carnival of Souls, a surreal, haunting, one-of-a-kind cult film that feels like it drifted in from another dimension. Shot on a shoestring budget in Salt Lake City, the story follows Mary, a woman who survives a car crash only to find herself plagued by strange visions and an eerie pull toward an abandoned carnival. The result is a film drenched in dream logic, where everything feels slightly off, like you're stuck in a nightmare you can't wake up from. The organ-heavy soundtrack, the stark black-and-white photography, the silent ghoulish figures that stalk Mary, all of it comes together to create something far creepier than its limited budget should allow. Director Herc Harvey poured his heart into it, and, you can tell, he never made another feature, but this single film cemented his cult legacy. When Carnival of Souls first came out, critics barely noticed it. Drive-in audiences shrugged. But slowly, horror buffs rediscovered it and realized how groundbreaking it was. Today, it's praised for inspiring filmmakers like George Romero and David Lynch. Its eerie atmosphere, especially the scenes inside the decayed carnival, feels like a blueprint for Lynch's unsettling worlds. What makes it stick? It's the feeling that nothing is safe, that reality itself is warped. There are no big special effects here, just raw atmosphere and mood. It's creepy, low-budget brilliance that proves sometimes the strangest accidents make the most unforgettable films. The Manchurian Candidate, 1962. Now, let's move from eerie atmosphere into pure paranoia. The Manchurian Candidate might look like a political thriller on the surface, but this is a film that gets under your skin in ways most spy stories never do. Starring Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey, and Angela Lansbury, it tells the story of a platoon of soldiers captured during the Korean War. When they return home, one of them, Raymond Shaw, is revealed to be a brainwashed assassin, programmed to kill on command. The catch? His mother, played by Angela Lansbury, in one of the most chilling performances of her career, is at the center of the conspiracy. The film blends Cold War tension, assassination plots, and psychological horror into a story that feels both of its time and strangely timeless. Director John Frankenheimer doesn't just show paranoia, he makes you feel it. The dreamlike brainwashing sequences are still disturbing today, mixing stark imagery with unsettling repetition. When it premiered in 1962, audiences were shaken. But then history collided with fiction. After JFK's assassination in 1963, the movie was pulled from circulation. For years, it became this whispered about lost film, a political thriller too close to reality. That absence only fueled its cult status, making it legendary by the time it resurfaced in the late 1980s. Why does it remain a cult classic? Because it captures the unease of an era while feeling eerily relevant decades later. Conspiracies, power, manipulation. It's the kind of movie that makes you look over your shoulder long after it ends. Shock Corridor, 1963. If subtle chills aren't your thing, how about a descent into sheer madness? Samuel Fuller's Shock Corridor doesn't tiptoe. It kicks the door down. The story follows a journalist who deliberately commits himself to an asylum, hoping to uncover a murder and snag a Pulitzer. Sounds simple enough, right? Wrong. Once inside, he finds himself pulled into the chaos of a mental ward, where everyone seems to reflect America's deepest anxieties. You've got a man who thinks he's a Civil War general, another who imagines he's a communist agent, and yet another consumed by racial trauma. It's wild, messy, and absolutely unforgettable. Fuller wasn't interested in subtlety. He wanted impact. The camera work is feverish, the dialogue often outrageous, and the performances toe the line between tragic and unhinged. What makes Shock Corridor fascinating is that it's both trashy exploitation and razor-sharp social commentary. Critics didn't know what to do with it in 1963. Some called it lurid, others praised its boldness. Audiences were equally divided. But over the years, that mix of pulp and provocation gave it a devoted cult following. It's the kind of film that slaps you in the face and then asks if you're still paying attention. It's not polished, but that's the point. Shock Corridor is raw cinema, a snapshot of America's collective nervous breakdown, wrapped inside a pulpy murder mystery. And once you see it, you don't forget it. The Nutty Professor, 1963. Yes, Jerry Lewis. Some people adore him, some can't stand him. But with The Nutty Professor, he cemented his place in cult movie history. This isn't just goofy comedy. It's a weird, satirical spin on the old Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story. Lewis plays Professor Julius Kelp, a bumbling, awkward science teacher who accidentally concocts a potion that transforms him into Buddy Love, a slick, confident, and arrogant lounge singer. The brilliance lies in Lewis's dual performance, switching between pitifully shy and unbearably smooth with seamless precision. What audiences didn't realize at the time was just how biting this comedy was. Sure, kids laughed at Kelp's clumsiness, but adults saw something darker. Buddy Love isn't just an alter ego. He's a critique of toxic charm and fake confidence. Rumors swirled that Buddy Love was based on Lewis's former partner Dean Martin, though Lewis denied it. Either way, the character struck a nerve. When it hit theaters in 1963, The Nutty Professor was successful, but not fully appreciated for its strange genius. Over the years, however, it's been reevaluated as one of Lewis's most ambitious works, especially by cult audiences who love its mix of comedy and commentary. The movie's colorful style, exaggerated performances, and offbeat pacing make it unlike any other comedy of the decade. Whether you love Jerry Lewis or not, you can't deny the weird, enduring charm of this film. It's the kind of movie that makes you laugh, cringe, and think all at the same time. And that's exactly what keeps it alive in cult circles today. The Mask of the Red Death, 1964. If you thought Vincent Price couldn't get any creepier, think again. The Mask of the Red Death is one of Roger Corman's most stylish Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. And it's not just spooky, it's downright hypnotic. Set in plague-ridden medieval Europe, Price plays Prince Prospero, a sadistic noble who holes up in his castle while the countryside suffers. He throws decadent, colorful parties inside his fortress walls, believing his wealth and cruelty can keep the Red Death out. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Corman wasn't known for lavish productions, but here he pulled off something visually stunning. The film is drenched in psychedelic colors, with each room in Prospero's castle glowing in eerie, symbolic hues. The result is a horror movie that looks like a fever dream, surreal, theatrical, and unforgettable. Price, of course, chews the scenery like no one else can. He's charming and horrifying all at once, delivering lines with the kind of flair only he could muster. Critics dismissed it as another cheap Corman flick when it debuted, but over time, its artistry gained recognition. Cult fans especially love its mix of gothic atmosphere and allegorical dread. It's not just about medieval peasants versus a cruel prince. It's about arrogance, denial, and what happens when power thinks it can cheat fate. So why is it cult? Because it's both lurid and poetic. It's campy in one breath and terrifying in the next. And that unforgettable masked figure of the Red Death? It lingers in your mind like a bad dream. This isn't just Corman making a quick horror buck. This is Corman flexing pure imagination. Faster, pussycat. Kill, kill. 1965. Now let's shift gears, from Gothic castles to the desert highways of America. And in the driver's seat, 3 go-go dancers who'll kick your teeth in without blinking. Yes, it's Russ Meyer's Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill. And it's every bit as wild as the title suggests. The film follows Varla, Rosie, and Billy, 3 tough-as-nails women in fast cars who get caught up in kidnapping, schemes, and lots of bone-crunching violence. Tura Satana as Varla is the undisputed queen of the movie. With her sharp lines, sharp looks, and even sharper fists, she dominates every scene. Forget damsels in distress. These women are pure chaos wrapped in leather. When it was first released, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Too violent, too strange, too unlike anything else on screen. It bombed, and Meyer's reputation as the king of outrageous B-movies didn't help. But over time, it was rediscovered, thanks in part to directors like Quentin Tarantino praising it, and became a cornerstone of cult cinema. The dialogue is razor-sharp. The fights are brutal, and the energy never lets up. It's campy, yes, but in the best way possible. This is the kind of film that plays at midnight screenings where fans cheer every time Varla lands a punch. What makes it a cult classic? It's a perfect storm of rebellion, outrageous style, and unfiltered attitude. Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill is not just a movie. It's a cultural explosion that paved the way for decades of gritty, over-the-top anti-heroes. The Loved One, 1965. Hollywood satire doesn't get much darker than this. The Loved One, directed by Tony Richardson, takes aim at the funeral industry. And what you get is a comedy so sharp it practically draws blood. Based on Evelyn Waugh's biting novel, the film stars Robert Morse as a young Englishman adrift in Los Angeles after his uncle's death. Instead of finding comfort, he stumbles into the bizarre, over-the-top world of the American funeral business. Cue embalming room gags, sky-high cemetery costs, and some of the darkest humor ever put on screen. What makes this film stand out is the cast. Jonathan Winters plays not one, but 2 ridiculous characters, while Rod Steiger delivers one of the strangest and funniest performances of his career. The whole movie feels like Hollywood looking at itself in a cracked mirror, glamorous on the surface, grotesque underneath. Audiences in 1965 weren't ready. Critics were shocked by how morbidly funny it was, and mainstream viewers were horrified. But that's exactly why it's grown into a cult classic. For those who appreciate satire, it's a goldmine. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't soften the edges, and it makes death itself into an absurd circus. It's a film that whispers, yes, even death can be a business. And by the time you finish it, you can't help but laugh nervously at how true that really is. The loved one is as cynical as they come, but in its cynicism lies its genius. Blow Up, 1966. Time for a trip to swinging London. Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up is more than just a film. It's an experience. Stylish, cryptic, and endlessly debated. This is one of the ultimate cult classics of the 1960s. The story follows Thomas, a fashion photographer who accidentally captures something sinister in the background of his photos. Did he photograph a murder? Or is he imagining it? The more he enlarges the images, the blurrier the truth becomes. This isn't your typical thriller. There are no car chases, no neat solutions. Instead, Antonioni turns it into a meditation on perception, reality, and the slippery nature of truth. David Hemmings stars as the detached, cool photographer, while Vanessa Redgrave adds mystery as the woman desperate to retrieve his photos. When it premiered, audiences were split. Some called it genius. Others called it pretentious nonsense. But that debate is exactly what kept it alive. Blow Up became a cult phenomenon, not because it handed viewers answers, but because it refused to. It's stylish, puzzling, and a perfect time capsule of London in the mod era. And let's not forget the soundtrack and cameos, from the Yardbirds smashing guitars on stage to the vibrant fashion world setting. Every frame screams 1960s cool. So why is it a cult film? Because it challenges you, frustrates you, and stays in your head long after. You leave it wondering what you really saw, and maybe that's the whole point. Wild in the Streets, 1968. Forget subtlety. This is one of the most outrageous political satires to ever come out of Hollywood. Wild in the Streets takes the youth rebellion of the late 60s and pushes it into a wild fantasy where teenagers literally take over the U.S. government. Christopher Jones stars as Max Frost, a rock star who rallies America's youth by demanding that the voting age be lowered to 14. Shockingly, it happens. Soon, kids are running the country, dosing adults with mind-bending drugs, and sending anyone over 30 into government camps. Yes, you heard that right. Over 30. Out of power. When it hit theaters in 1968, mainstream critics didn't know what to do with it. Some thought it was hilarious. Others thought it was dangerous. It's a mix of camp, counterculture, and biting commentary on generational divides. The soundtrack, loaded with psychedelic tunes, only added to the chaos. Over time, Wild in the Streets became a cult classic precisely because of its over-the-top premise and satirical edge. It captures the paranoia of the era while exaggerating it to absurd extremes. It's equal parts silly and sharp, and its "don't trust anyone over 30" mantra became a real-life catchphrase. This film isn't polished or subtle. It's a time capsule of late 60s rebellion, and it still packs a punch. Seconds, 1966. What if you could erase your life and start over? That's the haunting question at the center of John Frankenheimer's Seconds, and the answer isn't pretty. Rock Hudson, normally known for light-hearted romantic roles, delivers a career-defining performance in this eerie sci-fi thriller about a middle-aged man given the chance to undergo surgery and transform into a younger, seemingly perfect version of himself. At first, it seems like a dream. He gets a new identity, a new body, and a chance at a completely different life. But as he discovers, the company behind this rebirth isn't exactly offering freedom. It's offering control. What follows is a slow spiral into paranoia, where nothing feels safe, and every promise of happiness carries a sinister catch. Critics didn't know what to make of it in 1966. Audiences expecting a typical Hudson performance were blindsided by the dark, almost nightmarish atmosphere. It flopped hard at the box office, but time has been kind. Cult fans and film scholars later hailed it as one of the most chilling explorations of identity and conformity ever put on screen. The cinematography is as unsettling as the story. Wide-angle lenses warp faces, shadows twist across sterile rooms, and the entire film feels like a bad dream you can't escape. Watching it today, it still hits like a gut punch. Seconds proves that sometimes starting over isn't salvation. It's a prison with a new coat of paint. And that makes it one of the most unforgettable cult films of the decade. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. When Bonnie and Clyde first hit theaters, critics were outraged. Too violent, too romanticized, too much for audiences to handle. But guess what? That controversy only cemented its place in history and turned it into a cult legend before it even left theaters. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway star as the Depression-era outlaws, bringing glamour and grit to a story that had usually been told in straightforward gangster style. Director Arthur Penn flipped the script. He gave it stylish cinematography, charismatic performances, and, most shockingly, raw, bloody violence. That infamous final scene, an ambush of bullets shredding the duo in slow motion, was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. At the time, many mainstream critics hated it. The New York Times dismissed it, while others called it immoral. But younger audiences latched onto it as a movie that broke rules and felt modern. Slowly, critics reversed course, and it became one of the most influential films of the era. Why is it cult today? Because it still feels dangerous. It's not a neat morality tale. It's messy, stylish, and unapologetic. Bonnie and Clyde aren't role models, but they're unforgettable. The film cracked open the door to the new Hollywood movement, and cult fans have kept it alive ever since. Valley of the Dolls, 1967. Critics panned it, actors disowned it, and studios wished it would vanish. And yet, Valley of the Dolls is still here, louder, messier, and more beloved than ever in cult circles. Based on Jacqueline Suzanne's best-selling novel, the film follows three women chasing fame, love, and success in Hollywood. What they find instead is betrayal, heartbreak, and pills. Lots of pills. It's melodrama cranked up to 11, with dialogue so overblown and performances so intense that you can't help but be glued to the screen. Patty Duke, Barbara Parkins, and Sharon Tate deliver performances that range from earnest to completely unhinged. Critics in 1967 tore it apart, calling it trashy and over the top. But fans turned it into a cult classic for the very same reasons. The excess, the campy tone, and the melodramatic confrontations make it endlessly watchable. It's not about subtlety, it's about spectacle, and that's why it endures. Valley of the Dolls is proof that sometimes bad movies are the most fun to watch, especially with an audience ready to gasp, laugh, and quote the most outrageous lines. This isn't just a movie, it's an experience. And that's exactly why it has survived long past its critics. Spider Baby, 1967. Now this one is a true underground gem. Directed by Jack Hill, Spider Baby is a horror comedy so bizarre, it's often called the maddest story ever told. And once you see it, you'll understand why. Lon Chaney Jr., in one of his last memorable roles, plays the caretaker of the Merry family, a clan cursed with a genetic disorder that causes them to mentally and physically regress as they age. What does that mean? Grown adults acting like dangerous children, complete with twisted games, unsettling laughter, and violent outbursts. The story begins when distant relatives come to claim the family estate, only to discover that the Marys are far more terrifying than they imagined. What follows is a mix of dark comedy, gruesome horror, and offbeat charm that no studio in its right mind would have greenlit at the time. Released in 1967 on a tiny budget, Spider Baby barely got noticed. But decades later, it found a loyal cult following. Horror fans embraced its strange atmosphere, campy tone, and unforgettable performances. Lon Chaney Jr. even sings the film's eerie theme song, adding an extra layer of weirdness. Why does it endure? Because it's the perfect kind of cult film. Low budget, strange, unsettling, and completely unique. Spider Baby may not have been a mainstream hit, but in cult circles, it's untouchable. If. 1968. Lindsay Anderson's If isn't just a film, it's a revolution on screen. Set in a British boarding school, it begins as a dark satire of oppressive authority and ends in outright rebellion. Malcolm McDowell, in his first major role, plays Mick Travis, a student fed up with the school's rigid traditions and brutal discipline. At first, it feels like a bleak school drama, but slowly, surreal imagery creeps in. Rules blur, authority turns cruel, and the students' frustration boils into violent revolt. The shocking climax, students launching an armed uprising against their teachers, was unlike anything audiences had seen before. When it premiered, If was both celebrated and condemned. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, but many critics were scandalized by its violence and anti-authority stance. For young audiences in 1968, though, it struck a nerve. It mirrored the spirit of rebellion sweeping across the world, from protests to cultural shifts. Why is it a cult classic? Because it refuses to be pinned down. It's part satire, part surrealism, part outright fantasy. And it gave cinema one of its great rebels in Malcolm McDowell, paving the way for his later role in A Clockwork Orange. If is bold, strange, and completely uncompromising. Exactly what a cult film should be. So there you have it. 15 cult classics from the 1960s that prove the decade wasn't just peace signs and glossy musicals. These films dared to be weird, daring, and unforgettable, even when audiences and critics didn't know what to make of them. Which of these hidden gems have you actually seen? Drop your favorites in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and keep exploring cinema's strangest corners. Because the best movies aren't always the ones everyone remembers.